And then I would argue right around the early 2000s, we actually enter what a lot of people call the fourth industrial revolution: cloud computing, AI, communication systems on a global basis, this whole new world. And education is so slow to change. Our education system, the way we operate right now, is designed to create that factory worker that we needed back in the 1700s in that original industrial revolution.
Fantastic. Melyssa, thank you for coming. I appreciate you.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I'm always excited to talk to people about things going on in the world of education and especially things that are dear to my heart, like ed tech and STEM. So
okay.
Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. I'm super pumped to talk about this stuff. The tech is obviously taking off like crazy. You being at the heart of it with you teach a couple STEM classes every day in the Caldwell School District. And then you are also the tech innovation and integration person.
Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of like the stars aligned. Back
Okay.
in 2019, I finished up my PhD. My PhD was in learning, innovation, and instruction. And so it had a really heavy emphasis on things like online instruction, ed tech pedagogy. Then I ended up doing my dissertation on STEM and place-based learning. And then I graduated in December of 2019 with that ed tech focus on my degree. And then all of a sudden this little thing rolls around in, March of 2020, and the whole world changes in the world of education. And my district comes to me and says, "We know that you're a science teacher. We know you love all things science. However, we could really use your skill set in getting our teachers ready to deal with whatever fall of 2020 is going to look like." And I said, "But I'm not quite ready to leave the classroom yet." So they said, "That's fine. We'll create a little hybrid position for you. Why don't you teach a couple of periods? You can keep your advanced classes that you've been working with. We need you to step out 80% of the time and be doing some ed tech instructional coaching for the teachers in our district." And I said, "Sounds beautiful. Let's do it."
Man, they were so lucky to have you right place at the right time. You were like the only person with a shovel when they found gold in California. Like, wow, man. Yeah, I remember March 12th, actually.
Yeah.
It was Saturday, and I had a full battery of May SAT students starting the next day because my work week went Sunday to Thursday. And I was like, I have literally 6 classes starting tomorrow and no one can come. And I scrambled, like I didn't have a Zoom account. I didn't, very thankfully in my classroom, I had set up a system where I had a big iPad and I had a flat screen on a wall behind me. And what I would do is I would do the instruction looking at the kids in front of me while I was doing this so they could look up and see, because I didn't want to turn my back on any of them.
You didn't stand in the shower?
No.
Didn't you see teachers standing in their showers?
Oh my God.
Using the whiteboard
Listen
of the back of their shower?
First off, no. Okay. So I had a bunch of, so I was private classroom, right? So I had a bunch of HEPA filters in there. I got like stupid masks made with like the goat on them because it was like the symbol of University. I got this welding style mask that I thought looked so cool, but then it refracted all the sound in here. It was horrendous. Like it was screaming into a bucket. So no, I didn't do that. And then I spaced everybody out and, wiped everything down. But I very thankfully was able to integrate really quickly, whereas almost every other teacher I knew, both public and private, was like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so not your problem.
Well, but I still remember that day very vividly as well. One of the things that I love doing, and this may come up in our conversation later on when we start talking about finding balance between technology and other learning methods. I'm a huge proponent of place-based learning. I love to take students outside my classroom. I lead a lot of student-led travel. I take students to the Oregon coast. I take students to Florida. I take students out to the local wildlife refuge. One of the places I used to take students was to Yellowstone National Park. We did a 4-day trip there every spring. We'd been fundraising for it. All the permission slips and forms were filled out. The bus was loaded full of food. All of my students' suitcases were packed. 2:00 on that Thursday afternoon. And my superintendent shows up in my room and says, "Your trip to Yellowstone is canceled."
That was
And I was like,
March 10th?
No, because it was a Thursday. I'm pretty sure it was a Thursday.
March 12th was that Saturday.
Well, March
So it was
13th
like
was the
10th.
Friday. I
Did
think
I
March
get my
13th
dates
was the
screwed up?
Friday. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we were supposed to go
So
on
you were a
we were
Monday.
supposed to go on Friday the 13th. That's why I was
my
super
gosh.
traumatized by that. We were supposed to leave on Friday the 13th, and I found out on Thursday the 12th at 2:00. I'm literally 11 hours away from getting on a bus full of students and going to Yellowstone. the trip's off, the trip's canceled. There's just too many unknowns. And I'm like, I'm literally taking kids to Yellowstone. We're not going to be around any other humans. It's going to be the safest place on the planet for them because there's no one else there. And too many unknowns. So
Wow.
we sadly unpacked the bus, had breakfast the next morning in one of the kids' front driveways over a bonfire to try and use up some of the groceries and not be in anyone's house. And then started the adventure that was the next couple of years of education.
Adventure is a charitable way of describing it. That's very kind of you. Yeah.
Well,
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios. MTUstudios.com. We'd love to help.
I don't know though, because the COVID was horrible. Do not get me wrong. COVID was horrible. But I would argue that in some ways, it was the kick in the pants that the world of education needed to make some movement. We've been headed towards, there's a series of industrial revolutions that have happened throughout history. You've got your first industrial revolution in the 1700s when things become mechanized and people move into cities and become factory workers. You've got the second industrial revolution in the 1800s when electricity comes on the scene and all of a sudden cities are electrically powered. You've got the third industrial revolution that pops up at the end of the 1970s with the invention of the internet and computers as a commonplace thing in our society. And then I would argue right around the early 2000s, we actually enter what a lot of people call the fourth industrial revolution: cloud computing, AI, communication systems on a global basis, this whole new world. And education is so slow to change. Our education system, the way we operate right now, is designed to create that factory worker that we needed back in the 1700s in that original industrial revolution. And systems change slowly. If you talk to any district before 2019, they'd probably tell you they had a one-to-one tech integration plan in the works. But it was a 7-year plan. It was a slow rolled out. We're going to do this piece, and then we're going to do that piece, and it's going to take 7 years to make any type of tech updates to our district. And COVID made it happen in about 7 days, right?
Like 7. Where there's a way.
We all of a sudden put money towards it. The government, private industry was putting money towards it. We had like Idaho Business for Education was all of a sudden rerouting all of their funding into how do we get computers in the hands of kids? How do we address internet connectivity issues? How do we address the disparity between one end of the Treasure Valley and the other end of the Treasure Valley when it comes to internet access? Like all of a sudden, we got this giant foot in the butt and it just pushed education forward. The problem is that it happened in 7 days and we did it to all of these educators who had zero training in the pedagogy that they needed to back up this transition. So all of a sudden the funding was there. All of a sudden the resources were there. All of a sudden the will was there. We didn't maybe necessarily have the pedagogy in place that we needed to make the movement successful.
Okay, here we are. Talk to me about what that means. We put all of these tools, because everyone describes tech as a tool. They're like, look, there's a tool. I tell people, it's like, listen, I got really sharp, not the best Japanese knives, let me be clear. But like I got like the start, like if you go to Sur le Table or whatever.
You got the Wish version.
Like I got like the lower end ones that chip if you cut like a chicken bone or something. Like I don't have the really fancy like $1,000 knife one. But that's a tool, right? Now, mind you, if my kids come into the kitchen and grab one of the knives, they could kill us all with that knife. And there's this incredible training and safety mechanism that and just structure that goes around having sharp knives in the kitchen, right? And by the way, we need sharp knives because I don't want to cook with a butter knife. Like we need these tools. But along with that has to come a very well understood protective protocol around like, no, don't do this with a knife. And no, this person uses a knife, that person doesn't. And you cut like this, you don't just blah, blah. We didn't have any of that.
It existed. It just wasn't common knowledge. So there's an ed tech guru out of California named Alice Keeler. She is like the Google spreadsheet guru. She can do anything with a Google spreadsheet. But one of her favorite quotes, and she says it all the time, every session, every professional development I've ever been to with her, is that paperless is not a pedagogy. And I think what she's talking about there is this idea that don't put fancy ed tech toys in your classroom just because you want fancy ed tech toys in your classroom. Don't put your kids on a computer or a Chromebook just because they're available and they're in your classroom. That idea of being paperless, being a digital classroom shouldn't be your goal. Our goal is still education. Our goal is still, how do we make sure these kids are being prepared for the world that they need to be prepared in? And educational technology needs to be kind of that tool that we use to supplement the education, to enrich the education, not to necessarily just replace the things that we're already doing. So there are a couple of really good ed tech frameworks out there. I think that if you were to do a survey of teachers, not just here in the state of Idaho, but across the country, and you ask them about these frameworks, they wouldn't know they existed. But they've been around since the early 2000s. As we start to make that transition into the fourth industrial revolution, people in a whole bunch of different spaces are starting to say, yeah, but how do we make sure we're using the tools for the right thing? How do we make sure we're using tools appropriately? How do we put protocols in place for that? I think one of the first ones that I'm familiar with that came on the scene was probably early 2000s, 2006, 7, 8, somewhere in there. Educator, professor by the name of Lee Schulman comes up with something called TPAC. And what he said there was that when we train teachers, when we train educators, we do a lot of time on content. I'm a biology major.
Sure.
That's my undergraduate. I'm a biology major with a secondary education degree. So I am well trained in biology content. They also spent a lot of time in my program with that secondary education emphasis talking to me about pedagogy. How do you teach kids? How do you impart content in a meaningful way?
Right.
How do we make sure that I'm not just in there expounding on biology, that I'm actually teaching biology? So we're really good at those two parts of the circle, and we have been doing that for a really long time. So the third part that he brought in was this idea of technology. So we've got pedagogical knowledge, that's the P. We've got content knowledge, that's the C. But this idea of the technical knowledge, how do I use technology as a tool to enhance my instruction? How do I make sure that what I'm doing with that computer in my classroom is going to be more impactful than if I didn't do it with a computer? How do I make sure that I'm using the Japanese steak knife appropriately when maybe I should have just been using the butter knife all along? So there are these great foundational protocols, if you want to call them that, but I don't think they're very well known.
Right. And again, the teaching, the content, having expertise, and then the dissemination of such and integrating technology into that dissemination is a really big question, because just because you know biology and just because you understand how to make intriguing lectures doesn't mean that you would necessarily know how to integrate technology effectively into that pattern, right? Into that path. I did when I was doing SAT prep, I like tech, and I happen to know videos and things like that. So I developed an SAT program that was this incredible supplemental program. So people would come to my class and they'd say, hey, I was always trying to work with them. They were like, hey, look, I feel like I'm like not quite getting this. I'm like, all right, look, stay for this next class. And I would always have like an old tablet or something sitting around. I'm like, take this, right? You just did your 2-hour class, make an account on this program that came with my program. I'm like, and just hear me out. Try it for 10 minutes. And they would get on, and 2 hours later, they're like, oh my God, this is literally like you talking in class, and you're making bad jokes and you're doing all these different things, going through all of these explanation videos and practice tests and diagnostics and things like that. But it was, you juxtapose that to something like Khan Academy, which is quite possibly the driest educational program in the world.
My sophomore tells me that all the time.
It is so painful. Khan Academy is beautiful, right? Because people think that this is a perfect example of somebody thinking that presenting information to an individual in an accurate fashion is actually teaching them. And it's like, no. What Khan Academy does is it perfectly identifies every single step through, let's say, a math problem, okay, or a math concept. But it is literally like the boiled chicken breast and steamed broccoli of the diet world. It like, you will lose weight if you only eat steamed broccoli and, the chicken. But it's so painful. You can't get any buy-in. You can't get people to actually participate in it. And that's kind of at the heart of education, which is you have to have something that the person wants, right? And you have to distribute it to them in a manner that they will actually continue coming back and absorbing, right? And how tech fits into all of that, especially when it's so interesting, right? Like I have little kids. All of the tech is interesting. All of the stupid apps are interesting. Like they're designed to be that way. It's all like, you ever see that game? Like, what is it? Like Fruit Ninja?
Oh yeah.
Or something.
Mm-hmm.
What a dumb, meaningless game. It's like the strawberries flying up and they're, I got it. Like, I've never even let my kids play that. I've seen people play. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, parents hand kids phones. I'm not criticizing parents, but at times you see the apps that the kids are on, like you're waiting in line for a bagel or something, and like the kids playing the same. I'm like, what? Why is this so impactful? So when we enter the world of education and you integrate technology that's potentially very, very valuable, but you're using a platform like a laptop that also has access to all kinds of not valuable at all, but hyper interesting things. That's what I really get worried about. How do you manage that?
Sometimes it's just a giant game of whack-a-mole. I'm not going to lie. I am not going to lie. It is sometimes just a giant game of whack-a-mole. There's programs out there that help monitor, obviously districts, in order to make sure we maintain our E-rate funding. We're going to make sure that we're complying with things like COPA and SIPA, which are Internet Privacy, Internet Protection Acts, especially focused. FERPA is one probably most people have heard of, but it's bigger. It's aimed at everyone. Things like SIPA and COPA are going to be aimed specifically at children, and oftentimes in our country, specifically children under the age of 13. So there's definitely some rules and compliance that we're working with there. I'm actually part of a state, I don't know that we're a task force because we've kind of assigned ourselves the task, but through the Idaho Educational Technology Association, we've gotten a grant to try to start having some conversations around how do we approve apps for student use? How do we approve apps for teacher use? What criteria are we using to approve those apps? How do we make sure that the apps are actually meeting the security requirements that they say they're meeting?
Sure.
So we're actually starting some work groups and conversations around those, but in a sense, it feels like I've made this analogy before with my tech director that we're closing the barn doors after we let the horses out, because we let everything into the classroom during COVID because it was survival mode. It was nobody's got training, nobody knows what's going on. All of a sudden, every country, every company in the country has a product to offer that's going to be a miracle ed tech solution to education. And so we let everything in, and now it's this process of going back through and weeding things out, unapproving things, blocking things, narrowing the field back down. And some of that is just taking a lot of human work of looking at that. I know that there's some doomsayers out there who say that technology is going to ruin education. We're eventually just going to have like these robot teachers in the classroom, and the kid's going to plop down in front of, old sci-fi movies, the kid's going to plop down in front of the screen like the Jetsons and just watch the TV all day long. But I would argue that there is no way for any type of ed tech to do what a teacher does. There's just too much of a human element to education. Education requires, and I'm sure you found this through your tutoring, it requires a human interaction. It requires humor. It requires a personality. There's so many things that go into that job description that a computer is just not going to be able to do. I would argue that we're eventually going to get to a point where a teacher who's skillful at tech integration could replace a teacher who's not skillful at tech integration. But I don't think we're ever going to totally replace the teacher. There's just too much of a human element there. And that's going to be something that's never going to change.
It's okay. An interesting perspective. So first off, I agree with you that a teacher that's skilled in tech integration will likely even today beat out somebody who's not. Just look at the assessment capacity, right? Like you could, we've used iReady for my kids before, and there were specific areas where one of my sons was not doing as well in math as he should have been. And we were like, all right, look, what's one way we can get him up to speed really, really quickly? And we used one of the math, like Math Ninja or something, where it's like bounces that thing. You know what I'm talking about? The guy's jumping around and it knows this is a specific app that recognizes the types of problems that he's good at and recognizes the types of problems that he's bad at, adapts on the spot, and does it in a compelling way. And we got him up to speed using that. And yeah, my wife and I, both being educators, absolutely also sat down with him and tried to work through things. But the number of just memorizing different operations and quick recall on things, it was like, okay, there's no way we could have done that. And I remember being back in elementary school, we would have weekly sheets of math, and like the person who would get done first and be 100% accurate got a candy bar, right? I got a Butterfinger. I was a big fan. But the point is, like, you had to go through, do it all, be the first one done, and be 100% correct. Well, that's a really rough way to do it in compared to like this, Math Ninja program. So one, I agree with you there. Like, absolutely, I think there's an aspect for integrating people, integrating tech with people and making like a superhuman teacher, right? Because I'm not great with I'm not superhuman because I can get from here to wherever my son's basketball game is. I have a phone. Like, it's part of me that I factor my phone and its capacity to direct me appropriately into my cognitive planning. So like, I already integrate myself with this technology. But the second point you were making, which is the tech will never replace a teacher. Not only do I agree with you, I do agree with you, but that doesn't mean that people won't try. And
That's
there
fair.
are
Yeah.
a lot of schools in the area, and especially not picking on homeschool people, but I know that some homeschool co-ops, in the absence of somebody who's very, very competent, say in math, they're like, hey, Khan Academy has this great program. Like, get onto it. And again, you're doing the best with what you have. That's not a criticism of homeschool people or co-ops or whatnot. But a lot of people are, I think, replacing teachers with tech. I think people are attempting to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think this kind of makes me think of when I go into an instructional coaching situation. I have a teacher who says, come into my classroom. I want to talk to you about some ed tech stuff. I'd like to do a coaching cycle with you. So I come on in and I get a little sad when their first question to me is, I just saw this new thing called X. Explain it to me. Show me how to use it. Because I say, let's back the conversation up just to like 3 steps. I think you went 3 steps too fast.
Right.
The question I want you to be asking me is, I really want my kids to be better collaborators. How can you help me make that happen in my classroom? I really want my kids to work on their communication skills. They're not really great at communication. So I like to start by identifying a skill that I want the students to work on, myself as a teacher or the teachers that I'm working with. And then we start brainstorming technical tools that will be able to support that.
Right. Everybody recognizes, oh, there's this new shiny hammer.
Yeah.
There's this new shiny, can you show me how to swing the hammer? It's like, well, what are you trying to build?
Right.
They're like, no, the hammer.
Yeah, no, I
The
just want to
hammer.
play with the hammer.
Like, can you get, I don't know how to hold it right. It's like, okay, technology, again, coming back to the idea of a tool, is just being utilized to an end. Like, the hammer is not a good hammer. You can't say it's a good hammer unless you have it be good with respect to something. A knife is a good knife if it does something very specifically, and good means something different for a knife compared to a pen, compared to a hammer, right? And again, I agree with you. People are taking all of these shiny, incredible pieces of technology and then just throwing them at kids, where it's like, what's the product you're essentially getting at? Like, what are you trying to affect?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if you go to my school district website, the particular tech model that I've chosen to roll out to teachers, and again, I haven't had a lot of great time to be able to do super huge, in-depth professional development around this, just because we live in the world of education, and now that we're past COVID, everything's back to testing and assessment and reading scores and math scores. And so sometimes I get squeezed off to the side. But the model I really like comes from a guy named Ruben Puente Dura, I think is how you say his last name.
Just call him Ruben.
We will.
Okay.
Ruben's a nice guy.
He's great.
Ruben came up with what's called the SAMR model. And those are the questions that I ask teachers when I go into their classroom. So the S stands for substitution. I'm going to take a Google Doc, and instead of having the kids write their essay on a piece of paper, we're going to type it in the Google Doc. Ooh, look, I use technology. I'm a better teacher. You just kind of substituted one for the other. There really wasn't any significant enhancement. There wasn't any significant bonus that switch to technology gave the students. The A stands for augmentation. So augmentation is, now I'm writing my essay in the Google Doc, but I'm also using some of those extra tools that are built into the Google Suite. Like, I'm using the spell checker, I'm using the thesaurus that are built in. I'm able to connect to the internet and snag a picture to go with my writing prompt. I'm able to change the font to show emotion or to add to the point I'm trying to convey with my writing. So now I'm augmenting. So now this is slightly better. Continuing on though, the M is going to be modification. Did you drastically change what the students were able to do? Because now they're able to collaborate with another student. Now I've got students in my second period and students in my teaching partner's second period class, and we're collaborating together into a single document. That's a pretty big modification. We're not just writing our own essay at our desk on a piece of paper anymore. Now we're having this collaborative peer editing conversation going on around words and how we're choosing to use them and why we're putting sentences together the way we're putting them together. And then I would argue the most exciting of all is the R, which is the total redefinition of the types of learning tasks you can do in class. And for me, that sort of looks like stepping things up to global learning projects, partnering with students in other countries to have conversations, doing project-based learning, extended learning opportunities where technology is bringing a scientist from California into our classroom to have a talk with us about recent information about, the atmospheric rivers that are hitting California. And we're talking to a scientist from California about those. And we're coming up with solutions to situations with flooding that are impacting our area because of those storms. So all of a sudden, we totally redefined learning through the implementation of those different pieces of technology. But never once in there was it about the tool. Never once in there was it, I'm using Google Docs because it's cool. We're using Zoom because it's cool. We're using Padlet because it's cool. Never once was it about the piece of technology. It's all about, what do I want my kids to learn? What skills do I want them to develop? Where do I want to expand the learning process? How can I take it outside the classroom walls? Tech supports that. So I think that that's a really important model for people to keep in mind when they're thinking about technology in the classroom.
Okay. Do you, to what extent, if you do at all, get concerned about the capacity to do things and the value or risk that comes along with that? If I may, I'll use a health example. I think the medical field, what I'm worried about with this is I think in the medical field, you have a similar problem, which is we have more tools and more capacity to give individual people more information, and they don't know what to do with that information. So that you might have something that's like, okay, it's a 1 in 10,000 chance that you're going to, have a miscarriage. It's like, wait, 1 in 10,000? That means I have a 99.99% chance of everything being fine. Why are you telling me this? They're like, well, we have this information. We don't want to withhold it from you. And at the same time, looking at education, it's like we have the capacity to connect you with a kid in another country. And I think that's a really cool, shiny object. When are you actually connecting with a kid in the town over? Like, are you doing things off of tech that will have a meaningful community impact right now? Instead of like, I talked to some guy in South Africa today, it was wild. And like, they're talking to me about these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that something that you worry about?
I don't know that I consider it a worry. I think that coming back to that human component of education, coming back to the pedagogy that teachers are walking out of, hopefully their teacher programs with,
Sure.
that's something that hopefully they're thinking about. I know that it's something I'm thinking about. Again, intentionality. Why am I doing this thing? Why am I connecting with a guy in South Africa? But a lot of the projects that I do are a lot closer to home because I want my kids to be stepping into their own community space as they're solving issues. So for us, it's stepping out to the local wildlife refuge. It's stepping out to, something that's immediately here in our community, having a conversation with engineers at Boise State. So much more local for us. I think you can always play the shiny toy card. There's always going to be that shiny toy out there. And sometimes that shiny toy does matter a little bit. I look at my own student population and I think about I don't know if barriers is the right word, but sometimes the boxes that they live in are boxes that someone else put them in because there wasn't the time or the money for them to have any type of experiences. And without any type of experiences, it's really hard for them to have like a mental schema, mental framework for them to hang learning on. My oldest daughter used to tell me she had a file cabinet in her head. And when she needed to get new knowledge, she would just think about what file it was in and she would go to that file and get the new knowledge. But I also think my daughter had a lot of experiences to create that mental file cabinet around. A lot of my students don't have those experiences. And sometimes having those fancy, shiny experiences are going to be the thing that gets the kid excited enough to want to do the maybe less shiny experience or the more local experience. I also think there's power in connecting our kids to something outside of their own lived experience. So I don't know. I guess I'm maybe a little less reactionary around that just because I tend to be the person that jumps into the swimming pool and figures out how to swim as I'm in the swimming pool.
Sure.
I wouldn't say I'm an innovator, but I'm definitely an early adopter of technology. I like to jump in and try stuff out, push the buttons, see if I can break it a little bit. And oftentimes I'll do things in favor of let's see what happens.
Sure.
So maybe I'm the wrong one to ask that question of, but
Oh, I'm totally a ready, shoot, aim kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like 100%. I guess one of the concerns that I have is essentially we're substituting real human experiences and humanity for like, okay, look, every person in the entire world that has ever built houses in Mexico wants to write their college essay about it, right? Like, it is the most painful thing too, because they're like, oh my gosh, that week where I only ate rice and beans and tortillas was the best week. And I felt like I made a difference. And what you come to find out when you actually dig into a lot of those programs is the programs cost something like $4,000 to $5,000 to send your kid from, let's say California down to some place in Mexico for like a few days to eat like, rice and beans. And I like rice and beans too. I'm Mexican. Go rice and beans. You eat rice and beans and you build a house and like you help someone, right? And it has always blown me away in my educational life. It always blew me away that I'm like, okay, you live 10 miles away from Oakland. Like we know there's poverty and there are problems in our immediate area and you're flying to Mexico to like have this novel experience of those of us that can afford the $4,000 to $5,000 price tag, right? You're doing these things when you're missing the opportunity to actually invest in your local environment and especially the entrance of tech and being able to connect with people, for instance, in remote work. Like there are plenty of companies right now that are coming back and reevaluating their remote work policies because they realize like there's no way that you can like strike up a random unplanned conversation in front of the boardroom doors in the 5 minutes that you're waiting. And like, you don't know where that spurs. Like nobody knows where innovation comes from or like novelty comes from, but we know that the more people you have interacting and the more ideas bouncing off of each other, that's a good thing, right?
it's very synergetic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So again, the concern I have is that when people tout these incredible technological things in education, they can connect with these people and we can have this guy on. Like, why are we okay, first off, I was around for a lot of the atmospheric rivers. They were just rain. The problem is we never got rain in California. And so it was hellacious when it came and it was like, the roof is it's like your roof is not going to fall off. Like, I'm sorry that your roofing mastic got scorched in the sun and like, you're going to have to come and like put more of it around your flashing and stuff. But it's like, why wouldn't we invest in having real scientists in our backyard come and physically talk to kids instead of like jumping on a Zoom with some scientists in California? And I'm not saying that you're like responsible for this. I'm struggling with how frequently people are leaning on these novel and shiny things in the under the guise of like this out of your box education. Where it's like, but there's so much that we need right here to educate people on. There are so many people that need help right here. There are so many things that we could engage today right here instead of seeking some awesome, like, webinar.
I think there's only so much time, there's only so much space, there's only so many resources.
Yeah.
I live on the west end of the Treasure Valley, and every year we participate in the Future City Engineering Competition. And one of the really cool things about the Future City Engineering Competition is you're supposed to get a mentor. You're supposed to have somebody from the community come in and work with your students who's a real engineer, a real city planner, a real, person in the industry who's coming in and having those conversations and talking to kids about local stuff. And the teams that compete from the eastern end of the Treasure Valley, they've always got mentors. They've got Micron people, they've got people from T-Sheets, they've got all the local businesses. They're sending people over there. Those kids are drowning in mentors. It's really difficult for me to get somebody to come from this end of the valley over to the west end of the valley and make a commitment to meet with us once a week or even once every couple of weeks, because it's just not time feasible. I can usually get somebody to come in like once during the semester, but to get somebody who's actually a mentor and can form relationships with kids and come in on a regular basis is a huge time commitment and a huge resource commitment that just is difficult to overcome. And so if I have the choice between not being able to get a mentor to come to my end of the valley or reaching out to Boise State and getting somebody who can hop on a Zoom call with me once a week, There, I've just enhanced the experience for my students. So I 100% agree with you because, like I said, I'm the place-based learning lady. I am all about taking my kids out into the field. I'm all about partnerships with people in the community. I'm all about talking to kids about the things that are happening just outside the walls of their experience. And so I'm never happier than when I'm wandering through an airport or through, I'm loading up onto a bus with 40 middle school kids behind me. Some people get frightened. Some people's eyes get big. I'm just like, let's do it. We're getting on this bus. We're going to go roll around in some dirt somewhere. So I am all about place-based learning, but I definitely think that there are times and places where you're going to need to rely on technology to help enhance that learning because there just aren't enough resources, money, and time to go around.
What a beautiful example. That makes perfect sense. Here's a question for you. I have not yet heard anybody give me a compelling reason why K to essentially third grade should have their own pieces of tech, one-to-one tech, right? They got their own Chromebook, they got their own tablet that's school assigned. I'm not against hearing a reason, right? Like hey, this is like math. There's a classic example. A student of mine had this crummy charter school experience from I think like second grade to fourth grade or something. And here she was, this 16-year-old trying to go to college, and she couldn't mess around with fractions. She was in algebra 2, but she could not do fractions. She just lost. It was like this real clear staircase, these steps she missed. And if tech is like that, and you're like, hey, we give kindergartners, Chromebooks all the way through because these are the steps that they're learning. And if we don't give them these steps, like, their basic math addition skills, then this is going to be a real problem. I'm all about it. But I still haven't seen that. What do you think is driving people to give K to like, let's say 3? Because let's argue that 4th and 5th graders, look, man, even if you don't like one-to-one with a piece of tech, they still need to be proficient at like word processing and stuff. And you can't, if you want to make the argument that, okay, well, we can't guarantee that every household has these things, fine. But like K to 3, what is that?
So maybe I'm going to come at this question from a weird angle and stop me if I'm like going off on a bizarre tangent here. But I actually read a study just last week talking about the term digital natives. We use the term digital natives a lot to talk about our current generation of students, and even to a point, the students who are just outside of high school. If you're a digital native, you must just know tech. And the study is finding that digital natives is way overstating students' abilities. And on the flip side, or on the I guess same thought process, the study's talking about kind of what you've mentioned earlier, that we often see kids in restaurants who are sitting on a tablet playing while they're waiting for the waitress to come, or we see mom in line at the coffee shop and the kids in the stroller and mom's on her phone and the kids on their phone, and so I think tech is ubiquitous. I don't think we're going to ever stick the tech genie back in the bottle. That metaphor has metaphored. So you could use a bunch of different metaphors there. That is, tech is here to stay. And we see it in kids of every generation or every age. We see it with the littles even playing on the tech. And so I would argue that our littles, K3, they're not afraid of technology. They're used to technology. They're used to having that phone in their hand. So as we think about the fact that there's a lot of brain development happening in those early formative years, we know that it's so crucial to figure out things like reading by the time you make it through the 3rd grade. It's so crucial to have like basic math sense by the time you make it through 3rd grade. So along those lines, it's really important that the kids start to get some technology sense. Now, I am 100% not pushing for those kids to be one-to-one every day on Chromebooks all the time. And sometimes I think we've got them doing too many iReady type programs and too many, just kids sitting in front of a Chromebook and just interacting with the Chromebook program without any adult conversation there at all, which doesn't seem too far off from the kid in the stroller in the coffee line playing Fruit Ninja. But I would say that our kids are not digital natives. They are good at interacting with tech, but when those neurons are forming, when we're at that really formative stage where we're wanting them to learn reading, we're wanting them to learn math sense, we also need to start having conversations with them about being good users of tech. Developing skills. Nothing drives me crazier than 8th grade typing classes, 8th grade computer typing classes. No eighth grader in the world should be learning to type as a 14-year-old. That's a physical skill that's got to develop sooner than that. The coordination and just having an interaction with technology. So I don't know if that's really answering the question that you're asking, but I would say the kids got the tech in their hand anyway. We need to help them start thinking about it educationally, and we need to tap into, not on a one-on-one basis, but definitely we need to start tapping into those really formative learning years when they're starting to figure out, what does learning look like? How does my brain process learning? And how are things like reading and math and technology all incorporated in my educational process? So I guess that would be my best answer. I don't know the 100% answer. I don't know the perfect answer to that question.
Well, I mean, in your
But
defense,
I
I don't
think
think there's a perfect answer for
Yeah.
this. And again, I don't disagree that there are formative years where students learn the basics of math, they learn the basics of English, they learn how to read. You know, I have a little right now who's like, he brings home book baggies, right? So it's a Ziploc bag with a 8.5 by 11 printed book on it, folded in half once, and it's like his book baggie, right? And he learns that stuff. And so I still just don't, and again, I'm not trying to ask the same question again, and I understand there's no perfect answer here. I just, as a person, first off, my kids don't know what it's like to play a game on a cell phone. Okay, that's not saying that I'm some great parent. It's saying that I use my phone for work and it has never had games on it, and I've never handed it to them to distract them. Okay, the worst I've ever done is let them watch, like a Curious George or something on a phone. Okay. But I also don't understand, like, when people talk about, like, you're using the example of an eighth grader learning how to type, right? My dad's a physician. He worked, grew up broke, went to Vietnam, came back, got the GI Bill, went to medical school. God bless the guy. He learned how to type like as an adult. And now, as proficient as anyone, he can sit down and, type this stuff out. And he still does dictation, but he types on the computer. Oh my God, you should see him on his cell phone. He's got an Android and the stylus. He text messages me novels. I love you, Dad. But he's not dead. I don't know why I looked up. But the point is, like, he'll send me a text message that's like multiple pages. Sometimes it even has a continue button. I'm like, what is happening? And it's very frequently, and I love getting them because it's just like my dad streaming, what is it?
Train of thought.
Train of thought. Like he was thinking about something that related to me and he wanted to like tell me about it. And it's not like there's no
good punctuation.
There's no beginning, middle, end. It's just like this rambling story, stream of consciousness. There it is.
Yeah.
And it's fine. But like you see him, he types with his stylus. So he just moves it around like this over a keyboard, like so fast. I've never seen anybody do that. And this is something he learned in his 60s. So the idea that we lose malleability to the point where we wouldn't be able to learn the dexterity of writing or typing on a computer or, stylus, whatever. Like that's a tough sell for me for like, that's why we need to get the littles on computers, because it's like, okay, first off, why don't we just delay until like maybe the end of elementary school? And second, the formidable things that they need to learn in English and math, aside from like assessments and stuff, because I think there is a real value. It still doesn't compute to me. What's interesting that you did right away, which most people go to, is like, nobody's arguing for kids on tech 24 hours a day. We go to this mass extreme of like just a kid like hooked up. There's something out of like WALL-E, right? Like the crazy people floating through space, right?
Yeah.
The WALL-E people. And then the other side is they're like, but should we really eliminate all tech from everywhere in school? And it's like, okay, but we just went to both walls. Like, it seems that the middle would be the most reasonable place to be, which is, again, like, why not take the best, most valuable thing, like a math assessment, right? Which is rough anyway, because every math teacher I've ever had is like, Matt, write down your work and stop doing it with a pen. Because I do it in my head and then just write down one answer with a pen. It's like, that's not the way you go through calculus, man. Like, you got to get a pencil, So all of these things come to like, okay, I don't think it's not readily apparent that there's a cognitive barrier that would prevent somebody from learning sufficiently a word processing mechanism or tool in like 5th grade, right? It's also not self-evident that like something special happens, like learning language. This is another classic example. You learn a language when you're growing up like 0 to 6. That's a completely different experience than attempting to learn Spanish as a 25-year-old, right? We know this. Neurologically, it's a different experience. I haven't seen the argument for like, this is essentially a foreign language that they're learning, so we have to get them learning it in like when they're 5 or 6. You know
Computer science counts as a foreign language requirement for high school. Coding is a foreign language.
I believe you, but nobody's attempting to get the kindergartner coding. Right?
Currently, we're having big conversations statewide around the idea of like computational thinking and the computational thinking that comes through computer science and coding. So there is actually the legislature just this last year put into Idaho code right alongside PE and right alongside music that every K-8 student is going to have exposure every single year to computational thinking and interactions with things like coding. So I would say it is happening.
That's interesting, but what's the mechanism? Okay, so like we're talking about, like for instance, coding. Perfect example. I have this little black robot, right? It's like a little circle. And the black robot can go on a track. You get out a piece of blue tape or black tape, whatever. And then you do things on the tape that indicate what the robot should do. So straight line, dotted line, a line with a curve or a turn, and the robot will follow. That's entry into coding, right? Because they get this little thing and they get it to like do these things. I also, one of my sons we got him a soldering kit and this little robot kit. He built a robot that's like this autonomous robot. It has these little eye sensors and it'll go up to a wall, look both ways and then turn. You can program things of this nature. I totally get it. Like, and I think it's awesome. Like I like tech. I like the little black robot, right? Like I like these things.
He's adorable.
Man, he is. I don't know how they did it. He's like R2-D2. Anyway, so the point is I get that, but it's not self-evident to me. And I'm not asking you the question again. Like I'm just expressing my thoughts. It's not self-evident to me that having a one-to-one piece of tech, giving a kindergartner a Chromebook affects this end that we want, which is having kids at least exposed in some manner to, computational thinking, like real clear logic, cause and effect, the whole bit. Like, and I very much appreciate that. Even from a philosophical standpoint, we had to study, Sherlock Holmes in a philosophy class I took, because they're like, the deduction process that he goes through is like so precise. And that's how he arrives at these insane, almost incomprehensible conclusions at the end of this thing, because he went through these different logical steps in his head. And it was like collecting them like a chess match. Like I'm going to move here. He'll move here. Boom, boom, boom. Except you're doing in reverse. What did this person do? Then they had to do this. And then they would have had to do that. And that's why I'm standing here in front of a bakery. I don't know, whatever. But again, it's
every episode of Sherlock Holmes ever.
Every man, Robert Downey Jr., I got to say, he revitalized that. They had a really solid, real solid series there. They did that well. He came out of it. Robert Downey, he had some real problems in his 30s, but man, he turned it around. Good for him. Hugh Grant, I'm still waiting on him.
Still waiting on that magic to happen.
God, man, you got one role. That's all you play every time. Although I did see him in a movie where he was the really bad guy and he ended up killing a mistress and then was like this murder mystery. So way to step out, Hugh Grant.
Hugh
way
Grant.
To be, Hugh Grant.
Hugh. So I think that what your arguments are coming down to is an idea that I hold very near and dear to my heart, which is the idea of balance.
Yeah.
Right? Like finding balance. You keep saying giving an elementary kid a Chromebook, but I think it's more about they have access to it. I don't think we need to give every elementary kid a Chromebook, but they have access to it for particular tasks. I've also seen some really cool coding things done hard copy on the floor.
That's great.
I was lucky enough to be part of a program to do some STEM education in the United Arab Emirates back in 2018. Their government was doing a big shift to STEM for the purpose of computational thinking and critical thinking type skills that they really wanted their students to have. And one of the lessons that we taught to the teachers, because we were over there doing PD for the educators in the UAE system with the Ministry of Education, was we did hard copy coding on the ground. And you had a maze in front of you, and the person who was in the maze couldn't see. They had their eyes covered. They were the robot. And then the other person was allowed to look at the maze, and then you could give instructions for the person on which direction they could turn, how many steps they could take. And watching these teachers practice that over and over again to figure out, like, not everybody's steps were exactly the same. And so if I had this person, I would need to say 3 steps forward and then turn to the right. And then how far do I turn to the right? And it reminded me of the old coding I used to do back in middle school with the green blinking turtle. Did you ever have the green blinking turtle? Right 90. Forward 120.
God, I think like in
really,
the memory vault somewhere.
Yeah, like really early coding, but it was really fascinating because we were doing it with adults and it was hard copy coding. It was a maze on the floor made out of masking tape in somebody's classroom, and we were giving verbal directions to the person who was acting as the robot. So I think that you find balance, right? You find an interaction between humans, you find experiential learning, you find opportunities to support development of skills on a computer. I think my biggest concern with that 8th grader taking a typing class is if he's learning to type right now, what is he not learning? Because there's only so many hours in the day. What other skills could he be working on right now? And maybe typing is taking up some valuable space. But I would argue it all comes back to balance.
Yeah.
And I even think about, like, in my science lab, my kids are doing hands-on experiments in science class. However, we're collecting the data in a spreadsheet, and then we're using the spreadsheet to do some of the graphing work for us. Am I teaching graphing? I don't know. I'm definitely teaching how to read a graph. I'm definitely teaching how that data table converts to the graph. They might not actually be doing the hand graphing on the piece of paper with the colored pencil and making the dots, but they're definitely helping make a connection between a data set and a visualization of the data. They're definitely talking about which variable goes where, because did it set up the graph right? Does this graph make sense for the data set I have? I think that there's a lot of conversations we can have where technology and hands-on experience are kind of forming a balance. And then I also think that there's great times to just close the Chromebook and do something else too. When I take my kids to Yellowstone, when I take my kids to the Oregon coast, I actually collect their cell phones from them when we get off the bus. I let them have them on the bus because, I don't want to entertain them for 9 hours on the way to Yellowstone or the way to Newport.
You'll be like Chris Farley at the front of the bus.
Yeah. No, I do not need that experience. But then I walk up and down the aisles and I have a giant bag and I look like reverse Santa Claus or something. And every cell phone's going in it, and there's crying, and people are dying in the back of the bus because they're having to give up their cell phone for 4 days, 4 whole days. And then it's always interesting because we get to the end of the week, we do a closing campfire, talk about the experience, a little bit of debriefing, conversation about the things that we've done during the course of the week. And unprompted, every single time it comes up, oh, I am so glad that you took our cell phone away, because I actually made a friend at the other middle school that I didn't know before. Or I actually talked to this kid that's in my math class, and we sit next to each other and we've never really had a conversation before. So I definitely am a proponent of, there's times that you just put the technology away. You put the cell phone down, and I'm the ed tech coach saying that. So I think you've got to find a balance. I feel like during COVID, we did every single thing on the Chromebook. And then we came out of COVID, and a lot of people closed the Chromebooks and stacked them in the corner of their classroom and let them gather dust for the next 9 months. And I don't think that's the answer either, because I don't think we were doing our kids any favors by letting them just ignore technology for 9 months, because they're going to play with it on their own, and they're not going to do a great job without some support and some instruction. So I think it's about finding a balance. There's times when we're on computers. There's times when we're not on computers. There's times when we're balancing a hands-on activity with some technology graphing. I think that's where the future of instructional support from tech comes from. Not the shiny new toy, not the fancy thing that I just learned at the new conference I went to, not the whoever, can convince my district to pay way too much money for a shiny program that's going to improve math scores. Not in any of those spaces. But some of that comes back down to that teacher's pedagogy. How comfortable is the teacher with, I'm not just going to substitute, I'm going to augment, I'm going to modify, I'm going to redefine. I'm going to use this technology to enhance the instruction. And before I do any of that, I've asked myself that important question of, what is it I want my kids to get out of this?
2 things. First, collecting the cell phones. We several months ago took away our kids' iPads, and they didn't have iPads before COVID. And then it kind of stuck. And then we realized oh my God, what's happening? This is not great. And before we did that, we would use them as a punishment mechanism. So you got in trouble, you lose your iPad, you didn't listen to me, you lose your iPad for a weekend or a week or something. All of the kids would self-report. And we're talking 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. They would self-report that they were happier at the end of that week. They would actually thank us. They're thank you, this has actually been nice. And then the trash parent I am, I'd be okay, but you did your time. So Here's
Here it
your
is
iPad back.
Yeah.
And it was like, this kid does not, and I spoke with Dr. Condi, a pediatric neurologist recently, and it was like, they didn't have the ability to stop themselves. And he explained from a neurological standpoint, he's like, they're not going to. It is unreasonable to expect an 8, 9, 10-year-old with their limbic function and capacity and their frontal lobe development. He's like, it is unreasonable to expect them to have any form of self-control with this. Mm-hmm. They literally cannot do it. And these apps and companies and pieces of tech are designed expressly to prevent them from being able to reasonably say, hey, I should put this down. And it kills me to hear things like this, because then as adults, we just deliver them back to the children. We give them back, even though the kids, even though your middle schoolers are self-reporting, this was actually really nice. I'm glad you had fun. Here's your phone back. And they're like, and they can't stop themselves. They're like, I'm delivering to you a worse existence in your own words. You're telling me life is better without this, but we're going to give it back to you, even though we know you can't stop yourself. Right. Mm-hmm. And the other thing you said with 9 months, they just, after COVID, people took the Chromebooks, put them down, let them sit there for 9 months. And I've heard a lot of people say, but that's not a good option, because the kids are going to be on tech anyway, and they're going to be playing around with tech anyway, and they may not be doing it responsibly. To what degree should we view our education system in saving our kids from a tech behavior standpoint under the guise of, your parents may not be doing a good job with this. You may be participating in the tech world in a not appropriate way. So we have to integrate you with tech, because you may not be getting trained appropriately somewhere else.
We do that with a lot of things, don't we?
Well, it depends. How many things?
I don't know. I think that there's a lot of things that societal expectations have kind of pushed into the space of the school. I know there's the argument in the community that schools should just be teaching reading and writing. But then a lot of other stuff is getting kind of pushed into schools as well, because it's not happening in the community. But I think that it's really interesting talking about where are they getting the instruction from, right? Like, who's giving that instruction in appropriate technology use? My district this last year has been showing a series of movies called Screenagers. I don't know if you've heard those or not.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a film documentary from what is she? I think she's a psychologist. She had her own daughter coming of age. Daughter wants the smartphone. Daughter wants to, for all the reasons, have the phone. So they start doing some research, start doing some investigation, trying to find out, like, why should the kid have it? Why shouldn't they have it? What are the risks? What are the benefits? And she goes through kind of their journey. There's one about vaping, but the other two are specifically about technology use. For female students, a lot of times it revolves around a cell phone and social media. For the male students that are in the film, oftentimes it's around video games and gaming addictions. But they kind of go down through this journey of looking at all the aspects as this poor girl walks through, whether she's getting her smartphone or not. And an interesting thing that triggered this thought in my head is towards the end of the video, the kid starts pushing back and saying, Mom, you're always on your phone as well. Or another vignette, there's a family, Dad, you're worse than I am about first thing in the morning. You get up and you have to check your news and you have to check your email, and we don't have a conversation in the morning at our house. Nobody talks to anybody else because everybody's sitting around the breakfast table checking their emails, getting ready for the workday. So it was an interesting kind of pushback of, do we even as adults, do we even as parents have the skills that we need to make sure that we're setting up a safe and healthy environment for our students to be online, for our own children to be online? And I thought that was really interesting. I talked to my superintendent a little bit about it, and she said that now when she goes out with her friends and her family, they took the advice of the film and they all stack their cell phones in the center of the table face down, and whoever reaches for their cell phone first has to pay for the bill for the entire table. Yeah, right. But I think
that's
it's
when
really
you have the watch
interesting.
Under the table, just
right. Like, how often do we just out of habit reach for our cell phone? I've been really conscious this last year or so of trying to be aware of, like, my cell phone being face down, and when I'm around other people, I'm not even touching it. So we talk about students not having the mental facilities, the developmental facilities to be able to step away from their cell phones. I think we as adults, a lot of us are not handling having this technology in our life well. So
I mean, I think anybody who disagrees with that is just not going out to a restaurant. Like
Yeah.
just go to a restaurant and sit there and just stare, and you see people just sucked into these things. Now, not everyone, right? Like I'm sure they're, "No, I don't do that." Okay, that's fine, right? Like, and we have certain protocol with our cell phones and how we engage with them. I think these two things get conflated though, because first off, when we took the iPads away, and we actually took almost all tech away from our kids recently, they obviously had the same objection. Like, wait, dad's on his phone. And my wife, to her credit, was instantly like, okay, dad works on his phone. Now, when he takes you to like a basketball game, or he comes out, like this one particular day, I think it was a President's Day, but like, work didn't stop for me. And I took large swaths of the day off away from editing and interviewing people. And yeah, I had to come back. Like we went to the Y and got on the climbing gym or something, right? And then on the way back, I had to check something because I had an interview I had to get back for. And they're like, well, dad gets on his phone. And my wife very quickly was like, dad is not entertaining himself on his phone, right? Dad is doing work. And that's a distinct difference. If there is a utility here for this tool that you need to utilize, then we'll talk about it. And we also, I think, conflate, you had mentioned, dad's on his cell phone or, reading a newspaper, all these things. And we, kids being safe online. It's like, these are two different issues. We have adults who are gluttonous at some points with technology. Totally. Absolutely. But then kids being safe online is a completely different thing, right? Being a workaholic is a completely different thing. I mean, if you're talking about keeping your kids safe, a mom today texted me and it gave me this incredible story about her. She has 4 kids, and a couple of her daughters have had these just horrendous experiences with social media. She was like, we found out one of them had TikTok and Instagram. We didn't even have a cell phone for her, but she obviously was able to not jailbreak, but utilize her school administered computer to get on these social medias. And they had horrendously detrimental effects to her. Bullying and all kinds of things that were, horrible things, right? Like the worst of the worst that you could imagine happened to these kids. And this was with parents that were still paying attention, but they didn't understand the portal for entrance through school technology, right? Because they didn't give their kids, they're like, you don't get a cell phone, but it didn't matter because they still were able to manage through computer labs and then laptops that were supposed to have monitoring devices. They still managed to get on and create these accounts and engage in this hyper dangerous and damaging activity.
Yeah, well, and it may not have even been school accounts. It may have been friends loaning cell phones.
Yes.
The secret cell phone that lives at my friend's house that my parents don't actually know about because they don't pay for it, or the one that used to sit in the drawer in our closet, and I figured out through my friends how I can connect that to the internet when I'm not at my house. So yeah, all sorts of crazy ways. But I think I also go back to, again, the idea that not all screen time is created equal. Yes. I think the solution I often hear from a lot of families is, well, we're doing what's best for our kid because they only get 60 minutes a day of screen time. When they come home in the evening, they get 45 minutes, or my kid can earn minutes of screen time for certain good behaviors. They get to, and that seems on the surface, I think, like responsible parenting. That seems like a parent trying to act in the best interest of their kids. But I would argue that not all screen time is created equal, because there's some things that I love it when my kid is doing online, and there's some things I hate it when she's doing online. And I think the fact that she's sitting in front of a screen to do both of those things doesn't make those minutes equal. So I think some of it is just like an awareness of what's going on. And that's so hard to keep up with as a parent these days, right? Because things are changing quickly and there's always the new thing. And then even like TikTok, the point got made at the EdTech conference that I was at a couple of weeks ago, that like TikTok in China is not the same as TikTok in the United States. China's version of TikTok is very much locked down. The Chinese government regulates the heck out of it. They only show educational programs. It's designed to shut off after a kid has been on it for 45 minutes. Like TikTok in China and TikTok in the United States, they may be called the same thing and they may have the same, I guess, parent company if you trace it back far enough, but they are two totally different beasts.
It's called the Chinese Communist Party, right? If you have any delusion that the owners of TikTok are in for the best things for our youth in America, you are dreaming. Like it is expressly It is expressly designed to damage our youth, like 100%. And if you don't believe me, plug a kid up to TikTok and see what happens. And then look at the steps that the creator company went to protect their own youth. They were actually asked, what's the greatest risk to our youth? And they responded, our own technology. And they've taken meaningful steps to walk that back. And they have no problem letting other countries, like the good US of A, consume to our heart's delight.
So that could be said of social media companies in general too.
Well, sure, but and to that end, like all of the people that made like the iPhones and Zuckerberg, they don't let their kids consume these things because they know they're tapping into these things that make their kids monsters, and they know it's damaging to them. I agree with you, right? But it's a little, it's almost unconscionable that one country would say, "Hey, this is terrible for our kids. Let's make sure these things don't happen." But for those kids,
for anybody else,
full send, baby.
Well,
full send.
And I think like looking at training algorithms too. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about algorithms. And I think we were talking about Facebook, but TikTok operates in the same kind of fashion that, you know, if you stay on a video and you watch it, and then you scroll on, you start training the algorithm, and it's going to send you more of those videos. And I think from like an educator aspect, there's some really awesome things on TikTok. There's an awesome, vibrant educator community on TikTok. I'm able to collaborate and connect with people from all over the country who are doing really great things in education, not just in ed tech, but like in science, really great science things, really great place-based, problem-based learning, just behavior management, classroom strategies. Like there is this vibrant community out there that I want to engage in as an educator. But there's also this very weird side of TikTok. And my daughter talks about the different sides of TikTok. And she's like, Mom, I'm currently on like the green frog side of TikTok. I was like, what the heck is the green frog side of TikTok? She's like, I just get all these frog videos and they're super cool. So she'll train her algorithms to go in weird pathways, not necessarily bad, not necessarily harmful, but just bizarre pathways that she is going down. Right. And she'll spend, large amounts of time just exploring the green frog side of TikTok.
Yeah. So I trained Instagram to send me street food in India. Right. So like now every other video is this dude making some slop of something, throwing, and then like sticks his whole hand in a pot and reaches like and it's just, it's horrific but like there was this guy who actually did voiceovers I found. And he when I started following him on Instagram, he was at like 800,000 followers. And then like a week later, he was at 1.5 million. Like he had hit this wave of popularity and he was just pumping that out. I had to unfollow him because his voiceovers, and he would do like commentary, and he was this like, he kind of had this like ghetto twang to him, and he had really funny things to say. And I found him from the Indian food commentary. He's like, what the hell? Like, anyway, so the point is like, I was able to regulate that because it was so good. And you go down the same rabbit hole with green frogs. You go down the same rabbit hole with voiceovers or like Indian street food. And yeah, like I had a very robust TikTok channel when I was doing SAT prep, and I do these like insane math videos with, like different snap pick, maths.
Like filters.
Yeah, exactly. It was like Viking horns, or I was like an orangutan and screaming about a geometry problem. Like, yeah, there are cool things. But they still lead to, for young people in particular, I believe that you have a robust education community. A friend of mine who's way up in the PTA sends me these little things from TikTok that are really high quality, valuable things. That's us as adults though, right? Like it's a completely different conversation about like, look, are you missing your rent payment because you're on TikTok? Mm-hmm. Unlikely, right? Whereas a 16-year-old will happily, go down a horrendous path of social behavior because of these things. And that's ultimately like where the concern converges, which is what tools I see my phone as a tool. You see your phone as a tool. We're utilizing them as tools. We have these hyper sharp Japanese knives, but these knives are something different in a 15-year-old's hands. Yeah. That's my concern.
And going back to that professor that I mentioned from St. Louis, one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about her conversation was she talked about the idea of like digital wellness. We talk a lot about digital citizenship, right. But oftentimes it's like one lesson, one day a year. And it's like, are we being kind on the internet? Yeah, we're being kind. We're going to send the kindness pledge, and don't be mean to people on the internet. And like, that's our whole unit. That's our whole conversation about internet interactions. And there's so much else going on out there, helping our students understand things like, if you're getting something for free on the internet, you're not the customer, you're the product.
Right.
How do we help our students understand that? Well, that becomes an important part of conversations, not just in a computer class, but just interactions in education in general. As we're using educational technology, we've got to help our students be thinking about passwords versus passphrases. People are starting to use passphrases and even pass sentences now, because what we found is we've done a really good job of training computers over the last 30, 40 years to be able to, the passwords we think are unbreakable are actually super easy for computers to break. The whole, like, it's got to be 12 characters long. You've got to have a capital letter. You've got to have a symbol. You've got to have a number, and then that's going to be unbreakable. And that's actually really easy for a computer to break.
Right.
What's not so easy for a computer to break is a sentence that's meaningful to you. A phrase that's meaningful to you. So having conversations with kids about, about meaningful passphrases, thinking about things like, she mentioned this website called takeitdown.org, I think is what it was called. And it is a service that's being offered through a nonprofit organization, and a student, a human, can send a contact to this organization anonymously, and say that there's this picture that I would like taken down off of social media. Somebody sent a picture that I had sent them, or, sexting, nudes, whatever. Something got out there. I don't want it out there. Please take it down. And this service, this nonprofit, is dedicated to scrubbing it off of all social media. Now, obviously, they can't take it off somebody's cell phone. If it's gotten texted to somebody and it lives on somebody's cell phone, they can't take it off of that. But they are going in and helping scrub social media. So these are bigger concepts around just digital wellness that we need to be having conversations with kids about. And if we aren't having those conversations in the classroom, if we're not having those conversations as they're actually using the technology, they're not nearly as impactful, I don't think. I think if we just have them one day a year kind of in isolation, that's not really doing our students any favors.
Right. And to your point about if you're getting something for free, then you're the product. I'd actually go a step further, which most people I don't think conceptualize, which is if you're getting peace and time and your own brain power back because you plug your kids into something, you're making the kids the product. You're getting this peace and quiet, and they are literally the product. Mm-hmm. All the app makers want is for your kid to be on there. And I think people can rationalize their own participation in social media very easily. Like, all right, man, you got me. I really like seeing those, Indian street food things. But if I'm getting something for free, something unearned by plugging my kid into a cell phone or a laptop, and I realize somebody else is benefiting off of that, that creates a much different reaction and a much different decision in my process. That's a rough one. I love the things you said there at the end about the take it down. That's the sexting and the extortion and whatnot that is hammering our youth right now is so unconscionable. It's leading to death. Like there was a recent case in, I believe a kid in Michigan, football player, had a robust social media. Some haughty girl reaches out to him, makes him migrate from, which is a big piece, makes him migrate from Instagram to Snapchat. Specifically because Snapchat deletes all evidence of conversation. So got him to migrate to Snapchat. Then once he was on Snapchat, convinced him to send compromising photos. And then instantaneously, because he had built up a robust social media following, you come at me with like some naked picture of me and you say, hey, I'm going to show this to everyone on your Instagram. And I have 10 people. I'm like, go ahead. My mom's already seen it. Like whatever you want. But you take a compromising photo to a teenager who has a 5,000 person following. People don't realize that 5,000 person following becomes an attack vector. Anything you can do to manipulate those 5,000 people's view of the one person will do anything to stop that. Mm-hmm. So they go after this kid and say, hey, we're going to send this picture to all these people unless you send us all of this money. Kid freaks out because he has such a following. Let's be clear. If he didn't have an Instagram following, or if he had a very minimal following that he didn't care about, he would not have killed himself, but he did. And the only thing that allowed the authorities to grab the Nigerians that were in a warehouse sextorting this kid was that they tried the same thing with his girlfriend the next day, saying, we have this picture of your boyfriend, send us money or we're going to spread it to everyone, because apparently they hadn't gotten the news that the kid killed himself. She took it to the authorities. Authorities traced everything back, and they were able to actually extradite the Nigerians, I think, again, to Michigan. So you have this thing where it's kind of like just the participation in these engagements creates attack vectors for our children that at times end up in their own demise, like physical demise. This kid's dead. And it was because he had cultivated a following on Instagram. That was the only way they could leverage him.
Well,
So-
and I think giving our kids permission, giving our kids authority to mute, to block, to delete. I think that somewhere along the creation of social media and the kind of communities that exist on social media, people have decided that they have to
They have an
accept everything.
obligation.
Like when somebody gets a text, like we feel like we have to respond immediately,
right.
right? Back in the day, we get a phone call and we'd be like, I missed the phone call. I'll get back to you whenever.
right.
You're on my answering machine. But I think that the social media communities, you have this obligation to respond to whoever is trying to interact with you. And so I think helping educate our students that it's okay to block somebody. It's okay to delete somebody. It's okay
You don't
to
owe
mute
them
them.
anything.
You owe these people nothing. And then helping them be able to kind of spot red flags, right? Like a lot of us who use social media for professional reasons, I get a friend request and I'm immediately like, middle-aged white guy, you have no other friends. We have nobody in common. You have 3 pictures on your social media and they were all uploaded in the last 3 days. Like, red flag. I am just going to delete you. I'm going to block your friend request. I'm not even going to check into it any further. But I think our students don't look for those red flags. They don't look at when was the account created? How many friends and followers does this person have? Do we have friends and followers in common? Do we know other people? Or is this just some crazy guy who wants to interview you on a podcast that you've never met before? Or do you have somebody in common,
crazy guy?
like my friend who introduced us? So now all of a sudden there's like, we don't teach our kids to have those red flags go off in their head.
You know how hard it is to get up a reputation where you can on the spot get a hold of someone like, hey, I'm Matt. And they will appear in a studio in a garage alone like the next day. Like, you know how hard it is to do that? like I will do anything to protect that.
But yeah, so I mean, like identifying red flags, right?
Yeah, right.
Identifying things that indicate bots.
Right.
How would that football player or his girlfriend have figured out that this wasn't an actual human or it wasn't a human stateside? It was somebody manipulating the system.
Like, what do you think about just going back to legacy practices, which is like just straight up stranger danger? Like, why is it that we view virtual humans that are strangers different than actual strangers? Like if a stranger walked up to some girl and was like, hey, you're pretty cute, she'd be like, oh my God, get out of here. You do it online and it's like it crosses the blood-brain barrier or something, and like they just squeak in. One very classic scam that the SRO Gomez, who's this nationally recognized guy, says, like, piece of cake. All you have to do, he's like, I see it all the time. All you have to do is copy the top 20 photos off of some attractive football player at some high school, make a separate account, post only those photos, do nothing else, make the same name, same whole thing, and then just start reaching out to all the 8th grade girls. All the 8th grade girls that are going to that high school next year, or even the freshmen, be like, hey, see you're coming here, or hey, I see you on campus. I can't really come say hi to you because, I got my boys, they'd make fun of me, but follow me on Snapchat. You seem really cool. Goes to Snapchat. Again, you got to get them from Instagram to Snapchat. Once they get them on Snapchat, they eventually get nudes from them, and it's all over. And then the next week they get an extortion letter. Like, it's so painfully obvious that these things are being utilized, and that like, although we talk about red flags, it's like, you got to get back to the basics. Unless you've interacted with somebody in person and you're like right there with them, there's no reason to suspect that the virtual stranger that has, okay, how hard is it to get that profile picture? 0 hard. Like, you get that's the only verification that that's even a real human, a profile picture, right? Like, stranger danger, man. It's the same thing in the virtual world. And somehow we've lost this ancient and very effective wisdom. Anyway, that's my
yeah.
rant.
No,
Stranger danger.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Giving kids permission to
Just
Treat
wipe it
somebody
all.
online the same way you would treat somebody in person.
Somebody comes up to you at
Yeah.
Albertsons, you don't talk to them, you walk away. Somebody comes up to you online, walk away, block them, go away. That's it. Like, I think you're on point. Like, give people permission to be as ruthless in their protection virtually as they are in person, and you will make a stronger, more fortified young person.
Yeah. Well, yeah, my daughter will probably be angry at me for saying this, but she had a couple of months ago, she had a guy that was a friend of a friend, and they started talking online, and they talked and they talked and they talked a lot. And then she came to me, and she's only 15, and she says, Mom, so-and-so wants to go out on a date with me. We'd like to go meet downtown for pizza, which seems innocuous enough. Downtown, it's the pizza place. It's right there, in the plaza. Lots of people around. But I said, you know what? First, before you do that, I want you to go on more of a group activity. I'd like you and several friends. You pick the friends. The guy can bring some friends. Let's go do a big group activity.
I'll drive.
And
No problem.
and you guys can go out. Not a big deal. I'm not saying no here, but you have never met this guy in person. You have only ever talked to him online. You have only ever talked to him virtually. You have never met this guy in person. Right there, like, for your own safety, I'm not being a mean mom. I am saying, even when you're 21 years old, even when you're 30 years old, if you meet somebody online and you've never met them in person before, there's some precautions you should take. And so I thought that was really interesting, that she was like really kind of surprised and offended and taken back that I would put a second step in there before it was right from like virtual to one-on-one
Sure.
date. So I think those kind of ideas are what we need to make sure we're talking to our kids about as parents, and then just also as educators with
Right.
these conversations. We can't do a one day a year in your computer class, be kind to others online.
Right.
That's not going to cut it anymore. That worked in maybe 2012.
Right.
That doesn't work today.
Right. I mean, bottom line is we're dealing with really sharp Japanese knives, and we have to treat them as such. We know the risks that are emerging. We're not denying the capacity of this tool. It's incredible. And again, I will say it for the 100th time to you, I love tech. Like, tech is great. I'm blown away by what we can do. Just my ability to communicate with people and then disseminate that communication and, attempt to make it valuable. That's on me, right? But just to convey different ideas, like, it's life-changing. It has been in my life, right? That's why I got into podcasting, because my life had been meaningfully changed by some that I listened to. I'm like, this is great. Like, this is wild. It's awesome. But we just need to come up to speed with it. Right? We need to come up to speed with the risks, with what we're asking from people, and we all need to get on the same page.
Yeah. Well, something I'm hearing a lot in the ed tech community right now around generative AI, which is, all the rage right now in ed tech. But I think it applies to all the conversations we're having right here, right now, is that it's okay to both be really super excited about what technology can bring to us, and at the same time be enormously cautious and maybe slightly nervous about what technology can bring to us.
Right.
And it's okay to have that kind of juxtaposition. It's okay to have those two different, what's the metaphor? Two different wolves sitting on your shoulders, right?
Right. Well, I mean, think about cars. It used to be that cars, like, you had this incredible tool, this car, to get from one place to another. Like, that was great. And then slowly over the decades, people realized, like, shit, let's put a seatbelt in this thing. And then, it became like, let's get blinkers, and then let's get airbags, and like, let's, whatever. I mean, everybody knows the story of like kids in the 1950s just jumping around the car as the car is driving, and then like hit something. And
What do you mean the 1950s? I grew up in the back seat of, actually, I can remember laying across my parents' lap in the pickup truck, in the front seat of the pickup, having a nap on our way to someplace in the summer.
Yeah. And some of those practices in really remote areas, like, that's whatever. But the point is, it's not that you needed to get rid of cars when somebody had a horrible accident and some kid in the back of the Volkswagen bus became a missile going through the front windshield because he was running around and they ran into something, right? It's not that we banned cars. It's that we made cars safer, and we took training to operate way more seriously. We have driving schools. We have like way safer vehicles now. We take it really seriously. And it's awesome because now we can get around. Like, we put the 16-year-olds in the 5,000-pound steel missile filled with explosive liquid, and 75 miles an hour, down they go, down the street. No problem. Here we go. Bye. Have a great time. Pick up your friend. Like, we train our children, and we have forever in the most dangerous of things that we engage in, because somebody has to engage in that dangerous thing. Like somebody gets trained to weld, somebody gets trained to be a line puller. Like we train people in these things. We're just not training people sufficiently with this thing. And that doesn't mean we get rid of the thing. It means we train people for the thing, right? That's my position.
Yeah.
God
yeah,
bless it.
solidly.
Listen.
And like I said, we got to train our educators too, right?
Yes.
Like we screeched them into the 21st century though. My brother always jokes. He's like, at what point are we going to stop saying 21st century skills? Because we're already a quarter of the way through the 21st century. Maybe we should just be talking about like future ready skills, right?
Future
like
ready.
we're preparing these kids for who knows what. We don't even know what their future is going to look like. We don't even know what careers are going to be available to these kids. So let's just prepare them, let's train them, let's teach them. But then we also have to make sure the people teaching them have the background and the frameworks that they need as well to make sure that the implementation of technology is effective and that it's timely and that it's appropriate.
Right.
And not just technology for technology's sake. Paperless is not a pedagogy.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Yeah. I mean, 21st century, if I make it to 2050, I'll be really happy. I'll be like 75 or something, 76. But like my grandfather passed away at 69, like on my mom's side. Like I'd be happy to make it to 2050. Yeah. Stop saying 21st century. Listen, we've been talking way longer than I anticipated. This has been one of the most awesome conversations I've had in such a long time. I greatly appreciate you. Is there anything you would like to say kind of in closing or something we missed?
Well, it has been a great conversation. I really appreciated the chance to just kind of bounce ideas around and talk about the realities of the world I live in. I think that one thing that we didn't really talk much about, but it still kind of weighs heavily on my mind, is the term digital divide. It used to mean the digital divide was like, rich kids had technology, poor kids don't have technology. Technology's too expensive. I think at this point, technology prices have come down a lot enormously. We just looked at big screen TVs, and I can remember when my brother-in-law got one for like $8,000, and now, Walmart's selling them for $250. So technology prices have come down. Schools are starting to provide more access to technology for students. Businesses are stepping in and providing internet connectivity. So like, the digital divide isn't who has technology and who doesn't have technology anymore. I'd argue the new digital divide is how that technology is being used. People who are coming from homes where parents can support the learning and where parents have the ability to monitor and have conversations about tech at home are having a really different experience than people who are coming from homes where mom's not around, mom's working 3 jobs, mom's, there's only a single parent in the home. They don't have the emotional bandwidth or the space to be able to constantly. So technology does become the babysitter. So I think just continuing to think about technology through an equity lens becomes really important to me, and making sure that my students on my end of the valley are having the same opportunities and experiences with technology as kids maybe on the other end of the valley. That's something that I think about a lot.
Do you think that there's an aspect of that where it's like diet? Like at some point you could make the argument that people that have a more robust socioeconomic backing are going to get better food than kids that don't. Like I don't think that's a hyper controversial thing, like cheaper food, like fast food.
We talk about like food deserts, right?
Yeah.
And a food desert doesn't necessarily just mean you're not close to a grocery store. It also means you're not close to fresh fruits and fresh vegetables and the same quality of meat, and you've got access to more junk food. Your diet's more junk food and less fresh food.
Yeah. So like I
in a
hear
sense,
what you're
we've got
saying.
That technology.
Yeah. But
desert.
Like, that's just like there will always be a divide in some capacity because people with greater economic resources and more time, right? Like we just know that somebody's more likely to get a better education and learn more if they have dual parent households. That's just an educational fact, right? And then if you add in income, like the higher the income of the individual of the family unit, the more likely the student will be to get better education and longer education, right? Like there are some aspects of just reality in someone's life that it's kind of like, okay, yeah, so somebody who has a single mom or a single dad will probably have less monitoring on what they're doing on their digital devices. It's not that they don't have them. They absolutely have them. There's going to be less monitoring. That's going to be a problem. But like, where do we go with that? Like, what do we do with that information?
Well, I think like same thing we do with the food issue, right? Like we find ways to help supplement and provide support for those students. We like in my district, we have a federal grant that provides fresh fruits and vegetable snacks for the kids in K-6, I think, that they're getting access to some of that. We're finding ways to send home food backpacks on the weekends. We're finding ways to train parents, provide cooking classes, and provide budgeting, shopping classes, right?
Sure,
So
sure.
like, how do we provide support? Because I think education comes from community support. It's a community resource. That's why we call it public education. Is
Sure.
we're all paying into this, whether I've got a kid in the system or not. I'm going to pay into that system because that public education is going to support and wrap around everyone in my community, so that I'm creating a solid, healthy community for me to live in and for the future
Right.
of this area. So I think just continuing to be aware of it and not being okay with it, not just accepting it as status quo, and then finding ways that we reach out and support those students, and that we reach out and support those families. Maybe it's through education, helping parents have the skills they need to support their own kids.
Look, I'm all about trying to make better parents, right? I just, and again, I was a product of a single parent household. Nobody paid attention to what I did, so I'm not, and I was buying a lot of my own food. Like I'm not unsympathetic to this. What the thing that I get, the thing that's curious to me is kind of like, okay, what if you have the exact same kid without a cell phone and he just goes home and watches TV all day, right? Like, do we have outreach programs for that? Is that something that we should have an outreach program for? Is it any of our business? So it's to some degree, it's almost like, okay, perhaps the food example was a poor analogy, but to some degree, there are behavioral things and decisions that parents will make that will yield different results for different kids. And when you have two-parent households, you have people that are working diligently and paying attention to their kids, they're going to get a better outcome. And at some point, like just with this, with tech with kids, and not school tech, but any tech with kids. Like if you have parents that give their kids tablets and just say, have at it because they want peace of mind and chill on the weekend, those poor kids are going to get a worse life result. They will be cognitively different from a neurological standpoint. They will be socially different. They will be opened up to a whole slew of very dangerous things online that nobody wants to think about, but absolutely exist. And it's like, well, what are we going to do about that? Well, is it our place to do something about it? Right. And it's not a good result that the kids are going to get, but I don't know. This is so tricky to me. Because I'm very cognizant of saying like, well, we need to save kids from their parents. I don't like that. And I'm not saying you're saying that. Let me be clear. I'm not putting that on you. But when people start talking about like, oh, we have to educate kids on tech because their parents may not be doing it. It's like, how do we know that? And is that our place? Like there is a limit to what education should be attempting to do behind the closed doors of a house. And I don't know where that limit is. It's just, it's a concern because my ultimate concern is that we get to a point where I've seen other districts get to where they think they're the parent. And then ultimately what happens is you have an enormous and overwhelming backlash from the community. You have a complete breakdown of communication, complete breakdown of task assignment. And it's like, you're not my kid's parent. You're not my kid's parent. I don't care what you think of the way I'm parenting. You're not my kid's parent. Your job, and you see this real in reductionist plea in education. It's like your job is for math, English, and writing. And they just throw they're like, stop everything, right? Full stop.
What's that pendulum, right?
Right. You pushed
so
too
they
far.
swing it back
right.
the other
They swing
direction.
too far.
Yeah.
So whenever somebody's like, well, we need to help the kids because their parents may or may not doing X, Y, or Z. It's like, this is a really slippery slope when we start saying like, we need to take the role of a parent in any of these ways. And I'm not saying, again, I don't know what the answer is.
I'd be
It's
saying
just
like more of a
concerning.
partnership, right? Like
Right.
some of the parents don't have the resources to do things they want to do for their students. Supporting that parent community school, right? Like we're all in this together. We love these kids. We want what's best for them. And I would argue, I had one of my teacher mentors, one of my very first years of teaching, she said, never forget that regardless of what walks through your door, that is the best thing that those parents have to send you. They are sending you the very best thing in their life.
Right.
They are sending you the thing that they love and care about more than anything. they may not be doing the best job parenting that kid. They may have a lot of other stuff going on in their life, but they are sending you that very best thing that they have.
Right. They may be doing the best for what they can do.
So
right?
how do we open up communication? How do we have a partnership where we're all in it for this kid? The parents are going to do the best they can. We're going to do the best we can. The community is going to do the best they can, because it's all about making sure that kid has the opportunities. Sometimes I think we get in too many fights with parents versus schools, or schools versus community, or community versus parents. And we kind of forget that central component that we're all working around, which is that little human that we'd really like to have a great life someday. Yeah, right. We'd like them to have good skills. We'd like them to have the opportunities that they want. So I think sometimes we create false dichotomies, and really we should just be having conversations.
I think that's beautiful. And I couldn't agree with you more. To the extent that parents are looking for collaboration and help and saying like, look, I'm really struggling keeping my kid off tech. I'm extended. I have nothing left to give. Is there anything we can do? Is there any help? Oh my God, give that parent whatever you can. Yeah. Right. I think that's beautiful. And I think that that's at the heart of what an education community should be. It's awesome. Listen to me. Thank you for what you do. We have talked a ton. This is the most information and interesting podcast like I've had in a long time. I really appreciate you. Thank you for doing what you do in the education community. And thank you for coming and helping me understand and my listeners understand.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios. MTUstudios.com. We'd love to help.